Not far from the Arctic Circle, in the frozen wilderness of Sweden, a bearded man struggles to build less boring cars. These are the chronicles of his efforts.
Hello and welcome back to my garage, which actually has power. We have lights, we don't have heating, and still using the old fireplace. But we can continue working, we don't have to hide in the basement anymore. And today we're going to look at the new engine block and what to do with it. As you can clearly see here, we have a new engine block. That is actually a terribly old engine block, but it's painted white, so now it looks new. This one, let me show you, does not have additional holes. It only has 4 holes, like it's supposed to have for the cylinders. This engine block is checked and cleaned, and it's actually really good considering the age. And we're going to mount new bearings and start reassembling. And the new bearings we're going to use are ACL Performance Engine bearings, the race series. The thing is, they aren't actually supposed to fit this engine. It's kind of an experiment. The internet has told me they actually might fit, but we will see. Hopefully it won't fall apart. These race bearings are actually, they look like this. There you have the one part, and there we have the other part. And they're actually cheaper than buying standard bearings. So let's just hope they work. First we're going to test mount the bottom part. And as you can see, they have holes that match the holes. And they have like an edge. See there, it's a cut, which are supposed to match. And we have one, the center bearing is wider than the others. You see it should match over there. It's wider that way, it's hard to see actually. But if I put a standard one next to it, you see that's much thinner. That wouldn't fit at all. All of our bearings are now in place. And we're going to mount the crankshaft. But first, we have to put some engine oil on all the vital parts. So that you have oil on all bearing surfaces before you mount it. Because most of these parts are really clean by now and therefore dry. And we don't want dry metal rubbing up against dry metal. That will end badly. When putting the crankshaft in place, you have to be really careful because it's really heavy. So you have to go slow, so you don't bend, scratch, or dent anything on your way down. So we're now going to start to mount the upper parts of the bearings. And as you can see, this nice manufacturer actually numbers there, so you can see a big 3. And that number is supposed to be red if you're standing at that end of the engine. So therefore I know which way to put them back in. And number 3 in this case is the big center bearing. Well, it seems to fit. Let's just do all the other ones. With all the bearings in place, I put in the bolts back. And I have tightened them just with a hand tool. I haven't torqued anything. That comes later. But they're all in place. And as you can see, it turns really smoothly. this is going to be much harder to do when everything is torqued up and ready to go, but from now on we have no weird sounds and it moves really smooth. Now for a change of perspective, we have turned the engine the other way around because it's time to mount the pistons, and just some piston basics. This is called a piston, and this is called a con rod or a connective rod. This is the part that broke on the other engine and shattered everything, so these ones are okay. And as we can see on the piston, this is piston number 1, which I marked with a nice green pen. We have first, we have these are called compression rings and scrape ring. They're piston rings, all of them, and the first one and the second one are there to keep the burning gasoline and all the power on the top side, and the last one, the one that looks like a train track down here, that's for scraping down leftover oil that are running about in the cylinders in here to keep the engine cool and to keep it from going. But you don't want the oil going up to these rings, because that's when your engine starts to make blue smoke. This is where all the magic happens. That's where the fire starts. And these look bad, but they're not actually. They're mostly dirty because it's soot and all residue. It's not that bad. If this edge would have been torn or full of dents and scratches, and then you probably had a bad piston. But these ones they will do. They are expensive and I won't buy new ones. Okay, so when mounting piston rings, you can see they're really thin. You have to be careful not to overextend the ring, because if you open them wide enough, depending on what material they're made of, they might actually just snap. And that's sad for everyone, because you don't get spares. This is actually just a spring. It's supposed to be an extender, lays between these two thinner rings to keep everything tight but not stiff. So you keep on repeating this all the way, ignoring the horrible zoom work, and after a while you will have piston rings. Preparing to mount a piston, we have all our piston rings in order, and as you can see down here where there should be a bearing, there's a small hole, and this surface should be clean and free from dust and scratches. Here we have the bearing, and you should see the holes should line up if everything is alright. Snap the bearing in place, like so. If we tried to mount our piston in our cylinder just by putting it down here, you'll see it gets caught on all the piston rings. It's stuck. You could force it, but that would be a stupid idea. So therefore we have this clever tool, which is like a big clamp. You put around the piston, squeeze it together so all the rings are tight, and then you can push it down. As you can see, the tool is now in place. The piston is looking the right way, and I'm going to gently tap it with the back side of a hammer. Don't ever use a hard object. And if you feel like now it gets stuck somehow, try to tighten the ring, because if you force it, you will most probably snap one of the rings, and like I said, we don't have any spares, so if we run out, we run out. There, cylinder piston in place. When we mounted the back side of all the connection rods, so we have everything in place. If you crank it now by hand, everything should be revolving smoothly. There shouldn't be any binding or anything holding it from moving around. As you can see in the front of the engine block, it's quite naked. We have no seal around the crankshaft, and this is actually where we fit the oil pump. First we're going to fit this big gasket thingy. I think it will sit something like this. And then we're going to fit the entire oil pump. This is an all metal gasket, and it has no rubber or anything. It's just thin metal. If I turn it like this, you can't even see it. So we're going to put some silicone on it, just a thin layer to help it stick and to help it seal properly. This is the backside of the oil pump housing, and as you can see here, we have the surface that needs to be tight and not leak any oil, and all of these surfaces are machined really flat. Over here we see the gray areas. That's actually not a sealant area, it's just a piece of the engine block. So we'll put silicone like so on the entire thing, and the thing is, this is liquid sealant, and it can withstand oils, gasoline, up to 350 degrees Celsius. It's really tough. Regular like kitchen silicone, or you use like when mounting things, that will just fall apart. Now turned the engine block the other way around, and I've mounted the front. Since we have screws all over the place, we want to tighten them kind of not random, but in a system that pulls like one over here and then one over there and the one in the middle, and so you don't get this really tight and you bend something over here. This area over here is where the oil pump is going to go later. This is actually inside the oil pump, but I don't have the seal for this one because it's kind of tricky, so that will have to wait. Here we can clearly see the newly mounted oil pickup line, and it's a kind of a splash guard, and that comes from the old wrecked engine. I have to modify a few things to make it fit, drill bigger holes, and straighten this one out, because as you can see, it's full of bumps because material has been bouncing around on the other side of that one badly. But everything else seems to fit. It's all been cleaned. The brown residue on this one is mostly a thin layer of old oil, and it's no problem actually in the engine in the long run. Over at this side of the engine block we have a small special thing. Over there you can see a small dot, and that's actually a hole for the oil to feed the balance axles that are mounted on this, the bigger engine. But since I skipped all the balance, because who needs balance anyway, I have threaded the hole, and we're going to mount a small screw in it to keep it from feeding any oil just straight down. To make the oil pan really tight, I will put sealant evenly spaced, like all over the edge, or evenly spaced. I will put a lot on it. There is no need to put too much because you will only squeeze it out, but it will help the seal, which is made of the future material cork. Usually the holes in the gasket won't line up very well, so don't tighten the screws before you have all of them in their proper place, because you will have to shift things around a bit to make them fit. Now we can take a step back and admire our handiwork. The bottom end of the engine is mounted and done, and as you can see, there's no extra holes in this engine block. So we're on a good way to making a new engine for the car, and hopefully it's going to be slightly better than the one it had.